10-Minute Murder contains depictions of actual crimes. What you are about to hear is real and violent in nature. Discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
Welcome to the Brief and Bingeable True Crime Podcast. I'm Joe, the host, and thanks for being here. And I really hope you're subscribed to this podcast because I do a couple of episodes per week, and you won't have to go and search for the podcast every single time if you're subscribed. They just come to you automatically. So wherever you listen, it doesn't always say subscribe. Sometimes it says follow or whatever else they say. I wish they'd all get on the same page and make it the same thing, but essentially it's subscribing. So just push that button and you'll get new episodes automatically to your listening device, whatever that is. The story today is the Icebox murders. On June 23rd, 1965, Fred, age 81, and Edwina Rodgers, age 72, hadn't answered their phone in 3 days. Fred was a retired real estate salesman. Edwina worked as a sales representative. Their Houston home and their activities appeared unremarkable to neighbors, so nobody had noticed their absence. However, their nephew, Marvin Marlin, was growing increasingly worried. He decided to go check on them at their house. However, the home was all locked up and the blinds drawn. Marvin did not have a way into the house, so he called the police requesting a welfare check. Something wasn't right. Around 9 p.m., Houston police officers Charles Bullock and L.M. Barda arrived. As nobody answered the door, they kicked it in. There was no sign of Fred or Edwina inside the home, nor their 43-year-old son, Charles, who still lived with them. The house wasn't the tidiest, but that was not abnormal. Marvin told officers that neither his aunt or his uncle were the best housekeepers. But what was odd was the molding dinner on the table and the foul smell coming from the 3x5 refrigerator in the kitchen. Officer Bullock opened the fridge and saw large quantities of unpackaged meat that he thought was from a hog. This is a shame, Bullock remembered thinking. Someone is letting this whole bunch of good meat go to waste. As they had not found anything significant, the officers decided to leave the house. But before closing the door of the fridge, Officer Bullock saw something in the vegetable basket. 2 human heads. He quickly closed the door before slowly opening it again. Still, a pair of human eyes stared at him. The other head did not have eyes at all. The severed heads belonged to Fred and Edwina. Investigators later concluded that Fred had been beaten to death with a hammer. His eye had been gouged out, his genitalia had been cut off, and his organs removed. Edwina had been shot in the head, execution style. She and Fred had been dragged to the master bedroom where their killer had drained their blood and chopped them into pieces. The medical examiner later said that this dismembering was a fairly neat job, indicating that the killer knew what they were doing. The missing organs of the couple were later found in a nearby sewer, meaning they had been flushed down the toilet. Some of the body parts were never found. It was estimated that Fred and Edwina had been dead for 3 days, meaning they were murdered on Father's Day. The crime scene had been cleaned carefully. Now that the elderly couple's whereabouts were known, the police were left with one question. Where is Charles Rodgers? A tiny trail of blood led to his bedroom, and a bloody keyhole saw was found inside, but the man himself was nowhere to be seen. Charles Frederick Rodgers was born on December 30th, 1921. He enrolled at Texas A&M University when he was 21 years old, but he soon dropped out. Charles then enrolled at the University of Houston, where he eventually graduated and earned a bachelor's degree in nuclear physics. Charles later served in World War II as a U.S. Navy pilot and in the Office of Naval Intelligence before becoming a seismologist for Shell Oil for 9 years. Charles was no ordinary man. He was highly intelligent and even spoke 7 languages, but for reasons unknown, he suddenly resigned from his job in 1957, and by 1965, he was unemployed and living with his parents. At least it was thought Charles was unemployed. Still, he would leave home before dawn, before his parents were awake, and return after dark, when his parents were back to sleep. Neighbors rarely saw him. Charles would not even see Fred and Edwina much in person. He often communicated with them just by paper notes that he would slip under the bedroom door. Charles had turned into a loner and a recluse, and nobody knew what he was doing during the hours he was not at home. After the murders of Fred and Edwina Rodgers, an international manhunt started in search of Charles, but it seemed he had simply vanished. Because Charles knew how to fly, authorities checked nearby airfields to see if anyone matching his description had left the area by plane, but nothing was found. There was no trail to follow, and quickly, days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years. Finally, in 1975, Charles was declared legally dead in absentia. If he were still alive today, he would be almost 100 years old. Charles never returned to give us answers to the endless number of questions, but others had continued to investigate and study the so-called Icebox murders. In 1992, authors John R. Craig and Philip A. Rodgers published a book, The Man on the Grassy Knoll. In the book, they claimed that Charles Rodgers was actually a CIA agent. And that's not all. The book also claimed that Charles, along with Charles Harrelson, hitman and father of actor Woody Harrelson, were involved in the assassination of then-President John F. Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. According to the argument, Charles was one of the so-called tramps spotted in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas on November 22, 1963. It's also said that Charles met David Ferrie, an alleged conspirator in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in the mid-1950s while in the Civil Air Patrol. John Craig and Philip Rodgers suggested that Charles had recorded his involvement in Kennedy's death in his diaries. His parents could have found the diary and been suspicious about the many phone calls, and that's why Charles would have killed them before fleeing to Guatemala. However, Publishers Weekly review of the book and its claims stated the degree of poetic license in terms of reconstructed dialogue and attributed thought seems excessive here. The sourcing is virtually non-existent. This theory about Charles and his parents' murders remains unproven. However, other theories were offered in the 2003 book, The Icebox Murders, by forensic accountants and amateur sleuths Hugh and Martha Gardnier. After their investigations, they agreed that Charles was indeed the killer, but the murders were not motivated by CIA involvement. Instead, according to the Gardniers, Fred and Edwina were not the best parents in the world. In the book, they are portrayed as abusive and manipulative parents who used their son to take loans and forged his signature, ripping Charles off financially. After years of being walked over, Charles finally snapped and killed his parents, using time with his father's body especially. The Gardniers noted that a few days after the murders, someone looking a lot like Charles was overheard asking about a job overseas, using an alias. They claimed Charles could have used his contacts in the oil and mining industries to land in Mexico. The Icebox Murders asserts that Charles actually got murdered himself by a pickaxe lodged in his head after a wage dispute involving some miners in Honduras. But again, there's no concrete evidence about Charles winding up in Central America. The Icebox Murders has been called a work of fact-based fiction. Decades after the murders, it's very unlikely we will ever know for sure what happened. If Charles didn't kill his parents, there is no explanation for his disappearance, other than a third party would have killed the whole family before removing all traces of Charles' body and so causing him to be the main suspect. If Charles indeed killed his parents, there are several different theories why it would have happened. Without Charles, we won't get all the answers, and at this point, he most likely doesn't walk on the earth anymore. The house where the Icebox murders took place, located at 1815 Driscoll Street, remained empty and unsold until it was bulldozed in 1972. The lot was vacant until 2000, when condominiums were built. So life keeps circling, but the Icebox murders still remain a horrifying part of Texas history. And that's today's brief and bingeable true crime podcast episode, 10-Minute Murder. I'm Joe, and I appreciate you listening today. If you have a story suggestion that you would like to pass along to me, a story that you think I should look into possibly doing an episode on here, then email it to me, 10minutemurder@gmail.com. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, if you have not subscribed to this podcast, go ahead and do that. Wherever you're listening right now, click the follow button, the subscribe button, whatever that button happens to say for you. It depends on where you're listening. Click it and you won't miss any new episodes. They'll automatically come to you. If you have friends that are into brief true crime stories like this, be sure to tell them about 10 Minute Murder. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.